Welcome to Season 4 of Transforming 45. I'm your host, Lisa Boate, and this season we're stepping fully into our power. The heat, the hormones, the heartbreak, the healing. This is midlife, raw and redefined. Each episode, you'll hear stories of humans who are rewriting the rules, reclaiming their bodies, their desires, their voices. This is where we stop shrinking, start shining, and remember who the hell we are. Because midlife isn't a crisis, it's an awakening. Let's get transforming 45. Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of Transforming 45. This week, I am really excited to welcome Hussein Halleck. He is a Syrian-born Canadian troublemaker. Troublemakers are my favorite kind of people, so I'm so glad you're here today. Clueless father, hopeless romantic, and relentless people person. He's a recovering engineer, enthusiastic tech geek, and builder of things that sometimes work. A lover of politics and social justice, he's an opinionated bookworm and a dedicated follower of the cult of science. Above all, Hussein is a lifelong learner. Gotta say, this is probably one of my favorite bios of all time. So I'm so excited to have this conversation. Welcome to the show, and so glad you're here today.
Thank you for having me, Lisa. Yes, I'm glad you liked it. It was kind of a risky thing to put in, but I wanted something to provoke people and say, kind of hold the same feeling of the book and how I go about kind of with my life. And I thought like, and you know how we used to have these Twitter bios. Like, and there were people, they were really good because you had such a small space to put so much. And I remember loving those early days of Twitter. So I remember loving those. I was like, you know what, I'll put something like this, because otherwise, like, I did this, I led this company, and that's kind of the professional thing. And I was like, the book is not about that. So I wanted something that reflects the sense of the book in my bio. So I'm glad you liked it. This is awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was having this conversation with someone yesterday about how in these times more than ever, it's so important to lead with like our heart and the truth of who we really are. And I just felt like that bio was so honest and real, and you could actually get a sense of who you are as a person through that bio. So that's why it spoke to me so much. Yeah.
That means the world to me. That's great that it resonated with you.
Yeah. Okay. So let's talk about it. Let's start at the beginning. Who are you, and how did life introduce you to this version?
Well, I was actually writing an article about this today, and I'm like a very unassuming, thin little kid that grew up in Damascus, Syria, and I was very protected by my mom, and really like raised as the good, person that walks within the lines and adheres to all of the rules. And I ended up breaking all of them as I grew up, and I kind of enjoyed that. And I think along the way, all I did is I made choices towards what would be the most adventurous life that I could live. Because throughout my childhood, my mom was really strict in adhering. I didn't know any swear words until I was 14 or 15, like that kind of thing. Like my biggest swear word would be calling someone a donkey or something. I was very, very sheltered. And I wouldn't go out with friends. Like my friends would go out, would go places. I wouldn't travel on my own. So I was very, very sheltered and very protected. My mom, even until 15 or 16, would question me, who's that person? Where do they live? How are they your friend? So like, it's like the things that you would really usually question like 11-year-old. So she was very protective. And the most important thing is academic accomplishment. So I was very dedicated for studies. And no matter what I did, I have to get the highest marks. I have to, and there's no way that, let's say, a teacher would call my parents to come to school or something. So I had to maintain that image. So the moment I got some sort of freedom and on my own, I completely went all ways that I can shatter that image. Not in like, rebellion, but I wanted to experience many stuff that I saw the kids around me experiencing, playing in the street and doing the stuff that they want. And all people around me did what they want. And now I got the chance to do what I want. So I said yes to everything. So that kind of summarizes why I made the choices I made in my life, it was usually because I wanted to experience something new and I had nothing holding me back.
Yeah, that's really insightful. And we see that play out all the time, right? As you were talking, I was thinking about my own upbringing, and that was quite the opposite. So, my mom had a lot of restrictions placed on her when she was growing up. And she became very rebellious. And so she took the opposite tact with me and I didn't have a curfew. They didn't put a lot of restrictions on me, and they had exceptionally high expectations. So even though I didn't have all of the rules, I felt the weight and the pressure of the expectation so greatly that similarly, I didn't engage in a lot of things because I just felt like I would be letting them down, right? That they gave me all of this responsibility and they trusted in me. And if I did something that was against that, then I would be letting them down. And so that actually played the same kind of role, just in a different timeline, I would say. So
Yeah.
it took me until, I did everything I was supposed to do. I went to university, I got married, I had kids, I had a stable teaching career, I followed all of the rules and all of the expectations until I got to a point where I literally was being crushed under the weight of all of the expectations that now everybody had of me in my life.
Mm,
So it's always interesting to me to hear people's origin stories and the way they play out in their lives. And so I'm wondering, one of the things you said in your bio was that you're a clueless father. And I would say by saying that you're probably not, but I'd love to hear what makes you say that, and how do you see any intersection with that in the way that you were parented yourself?
yeah. I think that's a great question. I think the biggest thing for me is I always have high, I would say, not I would say expectations, but I have high confidence. And even though today I was talking about confidence and you don't need to have it, but I have very high confidence or expectation of myself. But I walk into something somehow knowing that I will rise up to the challenge. Like I know that whatever I choose, I will end up living up to whatever's needed from me. And I think it's because I realize something that I can learn quickly and I can adapt. So when I say clueless father is because I haven't parented before and every kid is different. And I think the key here is that it's more of a collaborative relationship that I felt with my kids as I grew up, and I felt that they are teaching me more about who they are and how I should parent them than, let's say, I know what it takes to be a father. I think every moment of interaction with my son or my daughter is a moment of discovery rather than a moment. So I know what to do. I mostly don't know what to do. Like, if I walk in and my daughter is, let's say, annoyed of something and it's something from outside, I haven't lived their lives, especially, and that's especially, I would say, exacerbated by the idea that I grew up in Damascus, Syria, and they are growing up in Canada. And I didn't go through school the way they went through school. I don't know, like, I didn't have girlfriends, for example, so I don't know what that's like. I lived around a time where I didn't have social media, so it's really hard to parent kids. I think in our age even more than before because the rate of acceleration is rapid. I think no matter what our parents dealt with, the threats to me, let's say from friends or stuff, like there was one friend, two friends, but on social media they can meet hundreds of people and you never know how would you deal with that. So I think it's more of a choice rather than a description of me, that I walk into this accepting that I'm a clueless father and opening up to learning and growing into father I need to be as they grow as kids. So that's how I look at it.
Yeah, and that's exactly why I said, by you saying you're a clueless father, I am confident that you are not. And it's because it's exactly what you just said. You are approaching this role and the young humans in your life from a place of curiosity, rather from a place of totalitarian knowledge, which
Yeah.
maybe is what some of us experienced as we were growing up. And it's so important. And I really want to get into this idea of acceleration with you because I think it's a really key part of what our young humans are experiencing and also what we are
Mm.
experiencing. Our kids are living a life that is very different from ours, from what we experienced. I too, I am 48, I'm Gen X. I grew up without social media, grew up with much more freedom, right? Like I am of that generation of, go outside and play for long periods of time. I have lots of memories of just, and I'm an only child. So I was alone in this a lot of the time, but I would, ride my bike kilometers down the street. We lived right across the road from Georgian Bay. For those of you listening, it's a part of the Great Lakes, part of Lake Huron. It backed onto a river, and I would get off my bike and I would get in the river and I would like rock hop up this river totally alone.
Holy, that's
Right?
interesting.
Like no one had I'd come out at a meadow, lay down in the grass in the meadow, no idea whose meadow it was, like watch the clouds for a while, rock hop back down and go home for dinner. And that is not the reality that our kids are facing. And so approaching them from this place of curiosity, I think is really key in building strong relationships with them where they feel seen and heard and understood, but also given the space to make mistakes and to try things out and have it not work out because those things are all really important.
I think that's a very good point. You reminded me that I had an imaginary friend, like because I was alone most of the time playing. Whenever I played with other people in the neighborhood, they were really mean because it, like we had gangs and stuff like that. It wasn't a bad neighborhood. People ganged up together, and I wasn't. My interests were really boring for them because I read poetry and I used to play Lego and I had a lot of imagination. I wasn't into. I like playing, football, basketball, but I wasn't into, like we played on the asphalt, so I hated falling and hurting myself. So I would be running. My favorite, my imaginary friend was like, if you remember the David Hasselhoff, he had the black car. What is it called, the
Knight
one
Rider.
Knight Rider? Yes, thank you.
Yes.
I loved Kit, and I was like, that was my imaginary friend. So I would talk to him and I would run around and imagine myself in the car and do that. And that was like most of the time. So I had like so much time for imagination. Right now, you don't have time for imagination. The moment you have any moment of free time, you're immediately on social media browsing and filling your head with stuff. So you have to make an effort to create space for to imagine, to wonder. And I had enormous amount of time. We had 1 hour of kids programming and the rest there's nothing. I used to beg my parents to stay after 10 o'clock to see Hunter, which was like the detective show from the US at the time. I loved shows, I loved sitcoms, and I got them, and my parents were like, "What is this? We don't want to watch it," or "You are too young, go to sleep." So they were very strict. So that meant I would sit with them, my imagination. That's all I had, and I would write poetry or write, stories. That's my life. And now they're living in a completely different world, so it is hard to navigate, and I think it's a challenge for people.
The gifts of boredom and wonder and curiosity and imagination are things that we are losing touch with that are so important for our development, for how we think critically, how we think creatively, how we connect with other people. And we're seeing how that's playing out in our society and in our culture currently in huge and devastating ways. And one of the conversations that I find a little bit frustrating when I get into with people is they'll say, "Well, things have always changed from generation to generation. It's just the way it is. Things change. It's not that much different now." And my argument, I think, goes back to what you were saying about acceleration, but it's the rate of change that
Yes.
is happening at this point. I often use so my grandmother and I think about her lifespan that helps me get my head around this, right? So she was born in 1930, in the early 30s, had a home without indoor plumbing. And then I think about, sort of the rate of change over her life and what she experienced. But this and so yes, there were like major changes going from no indoor plumbing to having, basically a fully automated home. Like that's significant. But when I really think about the last 25 years and the rate of exponential change in things that maybe we don't see in the same way. So, yes, we saw these like big leaps forward. And in some ways, the changes we're experiencing now can seem subtle because, like, we've had devices, right? But what the device is capable of in the last 25 years has changed exponentially. And I think maybe that's what people struggle with getting their heads around is how these things that maybe seem micro are actually really macro.
I've been thinking about that. I think that's a very astute observation, and I think the difference is I think we can categorize them in kind of three buckets. One bucket is, as you said, the comfort of life. I lived in a city, in the capital city of Damascus. Damascus is the oldest city in the world, so it's quite advanced compared, let's say, when I go to my parents' hometown and we go, let's say, to the countryside, and we had land, and we had most of my extended family lives there. They harvest and plant, and they had, as you said, like the toilet was like, here's the house, the toilet is outside, you have to go outside there, and it's like an old toilet, and you have one, let's say, running water. Everything else is in like big how do you call them? I don't know, remember the name, but like you put water in a place where you actually have a cup where you drink from. You don't go to
Right,
the
like a well.
yeah, so they had these kind of things. So this is what I grew up with. So I saw the difference between city life and countryside life, and I saw like that's kind of to give you an idea. And so the comfort of life definitely changed, and we have far more comfort. You can order a cab right now with an app rather than having to call a phone. Or I remember you had to send someone, especially when we have guests. You will send my younger brother grab a taxi from the street so that you can bring it to the door. So that's the, I would say, comforts of life. And then there is, I would say, how the technology that is, I would say, cognitively impact us. So there's the one that impacts us in our daily life and our comfort. The other one is how it impacts our brain. And there we have first the amount of information we have access to has radically changed. So before, if you wanted to learn about something, you would have to go to the library and you have to search for a book, or you have to go maybe read some newspapers. I remember learning about science, and it was at the end of the newspaper, there would be a section, and it's like this big, and there would be like, 100 words about, let's say, a new invention. Now you can dive into it with a few clicks. You can read all the research papers on something. So that is cognitive overload about any topic that you can handle. In addition to that, there's this how much you know about the world. So anything that happens at any given time right now that is significant, you can know about. At the time, we had to wait to the midnight news to kind of learn about, let's say, what's happening in the world, and it's always curated. So there's no curation, and you have a constant stream of information and news heading directly to you. And now, because of the algorithm, is also kind of designed to keep you there. So whether that's through outrage, or whether through capturing your attention, or whether through wasting your time, whatever that is. And the third element, I think, is how many people you know. In the past, you would have, let's say, 2 3 friends. Now you have to maintain relationships with a lot more people. You have social media. So these three things, I think, have changed dramatically and accelerated to the point that we are not built for this. Up until, I would say, the 90s, we're kind of built for this. Your community is known, the amount of information coming your way is more than before, but not something you can't handle to a certain extent. But once the 2000s started and the internet and the acceleration of technology came, we're not built for this as human beings, as a species. We didn't evolve for that. And so a lot of people, even the most intelligent people, I studied engineering and I spent my life learning and studying, and I'm having trouble catching up. Imagine the people who never studied, who, and you have to match, because you're now, wherever you are in the world, people treat you on the same level. Before, if somebody's visiting, let's say from the countryside, you don't talk to them as if they know what's happening in the city. But now you talk to everyone on the same level and you're expected to rise to that. So there is a lot of load on people, and people deal with that differently. And we don't have the same communities and the same support network. So it's a very complex thing, but it can be separated into how it impacts us physically, and how who we are as a species, how it impacts us cognitively, and how many relationships we need to maintain. And I think those things are very hard, and we need to be cognizant of that and be aware and be compassionate with ourselves that this is not normal and it takes time to get used to that, and everybody has their own process.
I couldn't agree with you more. And I think this is an exceptionally relevant conversation for anyone at any stage. And midlife has some real events happening that really bring all of this to light. So our bodies are shifting and changing. How we react to things is shifting and changing because of the physicality of what we're experiencing, as well as changes in all of the roles that we have played. Right. There's which could be changing in lots of ways. Maybe suddenly I'm a caregiver for an elderly family member that I didn't ever anticipate. My kids are older and moving out. I relationships, like you said, friendships that we've been managing for a really long time. Suddenly I just don't have the energy for caring for all of those people. And then like, with all of that is happening in our lives, and then we have this exterior massive shift happening with the rapid changes that we are experiencing with AI and what's happening in that world. And so, how do you see what's happening in people's minds and bodies, and how do you support them to work through this really accelerating rapid change?
Yeah. I think the key to managing all of this is a wisdom that we've always had, but we rarely pay attention to, which is focusing on the internal. So the way I explain it to people is that there are three realms or domains, let's say, that you operate through, which is the personal domain, the community domain, and the systemic domain. So personal domain is where you make your choices, it's your life, the things that you have more control over than anything else. These are the choices you make every day at your house, in your career, what you do with yourself internally. This is the domain. And this is where you have the most power, let's say. The community domain is where your actions and your behaviors and your words have influence. So who you surround yourself. So whether it's your neighborhood, the school board, the network of friends, work, these are the communities where you have influence, and words and actions matter there. But you don't have that much influence as much as they accept you. So let's say in a friend group where you are, let's say, more of a leader, you may have more influence on that group. In at work, maybe you don't have a leadership position, or you're just, part of a large team, so you don't have that much influence. You're just kind of a cog in the wheel. And the last one is the systemic, which is where you live among a nation or a city, and you're held to those systemic, and that's where you don't have almost no control whatsoever as a person. You have to collectively come together to change things. And once you understand that, you understand the limits of your power and how you need to operate. That doesn't mean you don't change things or you don't pursue things. It's just understand how much time it takes. For example, on the systemic level, to change something, it's generational. Sometimes it takes a long time. For example, if you want to change the school system, that's probably you have to first collect a lot of communities that support this. So there's a lot of work that goes into that. And that work will take a long time for it to happen. And when you work on a community level, it takes long, but not that long, especially depending on how big the community on and what you're talking about, and how much influence. So you may have more influence on a community. For example, when I led Launch Academy as an entrepreneurship community, I had a lot of influence because I worked on that community for 4 years, and I helped and I contributed, and I had a position, let's say, a power influence. Whereas, let's say, in my neighborhood, and as we see right now, you barely know people because you're always working. So I had very little influence. So even if I wanted to change something, I have to work towards that. And in the personal domain is where you have the most influence. So I would say, to deal with the world as it is, understand those domains and decide what do you want to change and in which domain does it fall. And therefore you can manage those expectations. So if you want to change how social media works and how it influences our lives, in the personal domain, you can just, not be on social media. But that doesn't mean that people around will be influenced by that. There, you want to probably advocate. If I want my family, even, which is a small community, that's not a personal domain. That's the first community domain. Let's say I have to talk with my kids and explain to them, and I have to manage the communication. I can't just say, "Well, we're not doing social media anymore." I tried it, by the way. It's like, okay, we're limiting internet. That didn't go that
Right.
well.
Yeah.
So because I have less influence over other people rather than, let's say, myself. And then if I want to change it on systemic level, like I want Facebook to stop being Facebook and being, a shitty, let's say, social media, that requires a lot of work, requires because they have such huge influence and it's part of the system right now. So
Hmm.
once we understand that, we can navigate it well. The problem is first of all, we don't understand that. We treat everything like I want this. And we see it right now in real time. People who, I call it vibe living. I feel this way and therefore my feelings are valid to me. So I want the whole world to adhere to my feelings. So we go on Twitter and we tweet and we think the world needs to change and we demand things and we don't have an understanding of the impact of our world of words and actions and how much ripple effect they have, especially people with a platform, especially people with have, let's say, they have a community.
Yeah.
And the isolation, it kind of amplifies that. Let's say when they have communities that are isolated from other information and they think they have, let's say, closer connections to power, so they impact the systemic forces and other peoples are left behind. So I think the more understanding that we have and the more we start with the personal domain, work through the community and collectively work to change the system and understand that it takes time, but it's a worthwhile effort.
That's a really good mind frame. And for disruptors, people who like to impact the systems, it's really challenging. And it's why a quotation I think from your book really resonated with me. And that was, enough doesn't arrive with money, titles, and success. Enough arrives the moment you choose it. And that really has been sitting in my heart because in many ways, nothing is ever enough. And I can roll back the yarn to figure out where that initially came from. I think I've told this story before, but when I was in OAC, it was grade 13 at the time in Ontario high school. I had gotten 100% on my OAC law exam. And I came home and I told my mom, and I know she meant this as a joke, but because I am who I am, it totally rewired my system. And because she said, "Well, why didn't you get 110?" And like that's one crystallization of the 1,000 messages I got, that nothing was ever enough.
But yeah, I know what you mean.
Yeah. And so I see that. I see, I was laughing and smiling when you were talking about change in the education system because, I tried really hard to do that until I realized, like, this system, I am a tiny little speck in this massive system, and it is so willing to destroy me rather than let change happen. This is something I personally really have to work on, is choosing enough. And are there any strategies that you have found that work for you to help you get comfortable with this idea of, I can choose enough? That can come internally. It doesn't have to be external.
Definitely. I think the biggest lie that we tell ourselves is that there is one thing or one state that where things will be okay or will be fine. What do I mean by that? I love the yin and yang kind of symbol because it represents life. Life is a paradox always. We want, comfortable life that where everything's is handled for us. If you ask anyone, I want to retire and sit on a beach, or like it's a version of that. But the moment you have that, you want more. So we are, I think, a walking paradox, and enough is really about being okay with that. So I had enough, let's say, of tea. This is yerba mate tea, but I want more. So how can I balance those things? You balance it by dancing with it. Life is a dance. It's stepping in and stepping out. So when you want something, you step in and you get it. And when you don't want it, you step out. And then you realize that you're going to need it again. So there is no one comfortable state that you need to be in. Enough is being okay with the movement of life. That is what enough is. I'm known around the people that any kind of disaster that happens, I'm probably the calmest guy in the room.
Mhm.
And the reason is not because I know how to handle it, not because I've done it before, not because I have confidence. It's because I know that this is the nature of life. The nature of life is that there will be calm times and there will be stormy times. And all I have to do is deal with it as it is. Whereas if I deal with my response of it and I'm stuck with the response, I'm not dealing with the situation. I'm dealing with the response in my head. And I just don't pay attention to that. I panic, I feel all kind of feelings, and I set them aside, and I come back to the situation. A good example of that is one time I was walking into a CEO meeting, one of the CEOs I worked with, and I was filled with the idea that he's going to be thanking me because of all the work that I've done for 3 months. And I sit there and he says, "Hussein, I might have to let you go." And it was so shocking because it's not like a regular, it's like I was expecting this thing and he was on the other side altogether. It was like night and day. And I was immediately, "What do you mean? I've done." And I noticed that I'm all into my feelings. So I said, "You know what? Give me a minute." And I stepped out, washed my face, and I came back and I said, "Okay, let's adopt a different thing. This is what it is. Let me get as much information possible so I can deal with the situation." And that turned out to be, instead of defending my position, and I'm not saying you shouldn't defend. Like, I definitely had all the case, everything to defend my case. But if I defended my case, what I would be missing what's happening. There is something happening there that I needed to jump into it. So I defer to asking questions, learning all possible, and then I turned this to one of the greatest kind of turnarounds that I've ever had. So what we need to do is understand that life is this constant yin and yang that is happening, and we need to dance with it. So if it moves right, we need to move and understand what it is, and if it moves left, we move with it. And I think once we adopt that, we land into this: what is enough? Enough is being internally stable to see, so not being clouded by what your thoughts are, what your ideas are. They're important, but at a certain happening, something's happening in life, you need to be with that happening. You need to learn it, understand it, ask questions, engage with it in order to change it. And that is, I think, what doesn't happen in life. We look at, let's say, let's say what's happening in the political stage, or what's happening in business, or what's happening with a friend, and we're all into how we feel about it. So I taught my kids something. I said, I know you're sad because your friend did that, and I get that, and you can take time to be sad. What I'm asking you is, what do you want to do? And what do you want out of it? What do you want in the next moment to happen? And that's a choice you can make right now. You can't change what happened. And that doesn't make it right or wrong. And you can have your time to think about it, to deal with your feelings about it. This is not, doesn't negate that. And I'm against this thing about toughen up and deal with it. It's not about that. It's more about, what do you want? Because if you miss that moment, because you can always take time. You can say, I need time to process this, and that's perfectly fine. Just know that, give yourself that choice. And then when you choose to come back, choose to engage with what is there rather with your feelings or ideas about it. That's the only thing. So clarity is when you have enough. When you have clarity, you can actually settle with, like, this is what's clear. Now I can choose what's enough. That's why I say enough is a choice, because once you see clearly, I see clearly, let's say, instead of my ideas, I don't have enough money, I don't have enough friends, I don't have the right job. Let's see clearly. This is a job I have. This is what I have right now. These are the friends I have. This is what I have. Is it enough or not? It's a choice. And if I choose it's enough, great. If I choose I want more, then it's a choice. I move, but I choose it based on clarity.
It made me think about the initial reaction to something. It doesn't have to be the only reaction. And understanding our neurology and what's happening in our brain is so important, because when we hear something that is jarring, so let's take your example, right, of sitting down with the CEO. and he's saying that he might have to let you go. Your body's reaction is fight, flight, or freeze, right? We get a
100%.
cortisol dump to that. There's real physical things that are happening in our bodies. And knowing what's happening and what our personal responses are so important because then it allows us to do what you did, which was I'm having this initial reaction. I understand it's actually a physical reaction because of hormones that are being released in my body. I need to give myself some time to recognize what's happening in my body, let myself feel what I'm feeling on my own without spraying it all over everybody else, and then come back to it once that process has happened, because it has a cycle, right?
Mhm.
Like, that cortisol will work through our systems. All of that initial reaction, the physicality of it, has a cycle that ends, and when you get to the end of that cycle is when you can then start to think with clarity about, "Okay, I felt what I felt, and what do I wanna do?" And I really like the way you laid that out so clearly because knowing and understanding that process is so key, especially in this time of heightened reactivity.
Yeah. I write about that. I call it split second, and it's the secret to understanding ourselves. Obviously, I'm not a neuroscientist, and of course, there are like so many. We're a complex human being. I like to simplify things to give people shorthands because, of course, I mean, if you want to study the human condition and spend your time, that's great. A lot of people don't have time and not interested, but they want to understand themselves. And the way to understand yourself is that today there's a lot of pressure on us to be a certain way, to live among the society, to act in a way, in a certain way among, like in a community. But there's a lot of stuff we don't understand about ourselves. One of them is, why do we behave the way we do when we're attacked? And it's because we evolved in our evolution. I mean, we think of ourselves as evolved human beings or evolved beings, and we're not. The civilization we're living in and the stuff that we're dealing with right now is, let's say it's 100 years, a century, but that century among millions of years of evolution is nothing. So for millions of years, the way we evolved, or hundreds of thousands of years, we evolved to protect ourselves from any threat. Our brains have one job, one main job, is to keep us alive, to keep us safe. So any rustling of the of the bushes, it's a tiger or saber-toothed tiger. I'm gonna die. So fight or flight. And right now we don't live unless you're threatened, unless your life is threatened. We see our brain is not geared towards, well, this is just feedback from a friend, I'm okay. It's like, this is feedback, I'm a threat, I'm gonna die. Now you don't think like that, but your brain immediately shuts down and immediately raises your defenses to protect you. So we deal with everything. If you notice, why am I overreacting? We're very hard on ourselves. I would recommend, first, let's understand ourselves before we being hard on ourselves. You can train yourself and you can manage yourself, but you need to understand yourself first in order to manage yourself. We don't come with a manual. You're not a machine, so you can't operate like a machine. You don't have a process, but you can understand a few things about yourself. Number one, we're all the same. We respond to feedback as if it's a fight or flight situation. So your first response is usually your worst response.
Yes.
So the first thing is that, and be compassionate with yourself. And it's like, okay, I know this is how I'm responding. I know I'm feeling these feelings. And everybody deals, some people, you can train yourself to manage those feelings. I mean, by that time when I had that meeting, I had 25 years of business experience. I've been into all kind of situations. And still in that situation, I responded like my life is going to end. Like, how
Mhm.
could this happen? So you don't control your hormones, you don't control your response. So the smartest thing I did is I gave myself time. And that was, it wasn't like a smart thing. It's like I noticed it. So being in yourself and noticing yourself and giving yourself time. So I
Yeah.
think that's really important. And then the
Yeah.
second thing is you make a choice on how you want to handle the situation. Unless it's a fire and you have to run away, unless your life is in danger, give yourself that time because you want to make intelligent decisions, and you want to get in the data and be in a state that you can deal with that thing. And I think these are the things that we forget to do that, and we don't get trained. It's like we don't get trained to do that.
Actually, we get trained to do the opposite, right?
Yes.
Like, as an educator, I can speak to speed is one of the things that is valued in our current education more than anything else, right? How quickly you respond to something, how quickly you get your thoughts out. It's one of the things that really frustrated me because we know now that that is the antithesis to how the brain actually works. And when we teach people to actually give themselves time, as you are suggesting, then you're able to come up with a more well-reasoned answer. Because when we are in that fight, flight, freeze stage, our prefrontal cortex is offline and we actually can't make rational choices, decisions, and thoughts. And so knowing that and knowing that taking time is actually a sign of wisdom is so important. And it brings me to the curiosity that I have about the title of your book.
Mm.
So, The Dark Arts of Life's Mastery. What does dark art mean to you? I think I'm getting an idea from the conversation we're having, but I'm so curious about it.
Yeah, I think the art there is because uh, of my love for art and how art works. The way art works is that you are in the discovery mode. Rarely does great pieces of art, if you think of any great piece of art, it's actually a discovery. They never meant it to be a certain way. Like the Mona Lisa, for example, like the mystery of her smile, for example, that for ages we were wondering, why is that? All right. And no painting is the same for a great artist. They can't even, they themselves can't replicate that. And even their students who trained under them for years can't replicate exactly what it is. So I think art is all about that one, let's say, one of a kind, and the unpredictability, the adventure of discovery. That's the part. And the dark art is because there is always these mystery. There's always this thing that this forbidden kind of thing. We don't live life for mastery, especially in today's world. It's all about fitting in and being part of the machine that is our systemic forces right now. Anything outside of that is seen as rebellious. If we look at today's world, who are the masters of today's world? They are all the people who are on the edges of society. Like we look at what I always bring this example, Taylor Swift. Taylor Swift is a singer. And if you were to ask, any parent right now, what do you want for your son? And probably the last thing is like musician. Unless your parents are musicians and successful musicians, nobody would want a poet or a musician or an artist. These are the things that like, oh, I don't want that for them. I want them to be a doctor, engineer. But who are the people who have the most influence? And let's say the people that are making even the most money. I mean, Taylor Swift, every concert that she has is $1 billion business. Every concert, not just her. People, cities will compete to attract Taylor Swift just like they compete to attract Amazon. But there is no path. You can't say, well, follow in the footsteps of Taylor Swift. But we can say, well, you know what? Follow in the footsteps of Jeff
Oh,
Bezos.
Jeff Bezos.
Yeah, follow in the footsteps, and they read into his advice. But I taught hundreds of entrepreneurs, thousands actually, and there is no path. That's the thing about life. It's a dark art. So if you really want to master life and you really want to live a life where you have your full potential, whatever that looks like, it's a dark art. It's never something that is a process or it's like a known thing that you do. And that is why I named it like that, because what I hope for people is not a life, of the lives that we would as success. Success, I really don't like that word because success depends on other people measurements of your life. Life mastery depends on who you are and what you decide for your life and what you choose for your life. So you can decide if you've mastered life. And it's a kind of a internal conversation rather than an external projection. And that is why I chose it that way.
I really like the bringing together of darkness and mystery. and that it feels like an invitation to lean into the mystery of life because in reality that's all we have, right? Is we are all living in the mystery of this very strange experiment we seem to find ourselves in. And the more we think our pathway is going to go one way, the more it doesn't. And so letting it be mysterious and getting comfortable with that is a really powerful and beautiful way of looking at all of the change that happens throughout the course of our lives. Hussein, I could talk to you all day long. Thank you so much for this conversation. Listeners, all of the information will be in the show notes where you can buy the book, how you can connect. So make sure you check that out. Again, thanks so much for being here today. I really appreciate you.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you for the great conversation, the great questions. I'm really glad I was here.
Thank you for hanging out with me on Transforming 45. If you laughed, nodded, or had an oh wow moment, hit follow and share it with your favorite midlife human. Find me on Instagram at @lboat and keep those transformations coming.
Electric acid.